Arthur Brooks is a New York Times best-selling author and professor at Harvard School of Business. He was on campus at Benedictine College as the 2025 Convocation Speaker. So we invited him to the studio to discuss his work on how to help people live a happy life through science and ideas.
Benedictine College is transforming culture in America, one conversation at a time. From our studios in Atchison, Kansas, these are the Benedictine Dialogues.
All right, Dr. Brooks, welcome to the Benedictine Dialogues.
Nice to see you too, Dr. Zimmerer.
Appreciate that. Yeah. It's funny. I realized this is the third or fourth time that we've chatted like this.
Yeah,
so it's really
I haven't
great to
seen
have
you in about 3 years.
Yes,
I think, and you still have magnificent hair.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
What's the secret?
6 kids, and that's why it's gray. So.
Oh man, I should have had 3 more kids, and I'd still have my head of hair.
I guess so. Yeah. Well, great to have you here.
Thanks.
Really looking forward to your speech at the Convocation tomorrow. And thank you so much for coming to Benedictine College.
It's a famous place. That's actually my first visit here, but I've known about it for a long time, and it holds a special place in the culture, in the Catholic culture in the United States, and the rejuvenation of Catholic culture as well. So what a delight to be here in person.
Well, thank you so much. So one of the things we've done actually here at Benedictine College is we've got your book, Build the Life You Want, and we actually got it to faculty, staff, students. Everybody got a copy of it leading up to your visit here. So I'm looking forward to sitting down and chatting with you about what does it mean to be happy? How do you become happy? Yeah. So initially, what piqued your interest in researching happiness specifically?
I'm a behavioral scientist by background. And I was working on my PhD. There were a number of things I wanted to study as I came out as an assistant professor. I was doing a lot of work on the arts. I have a background in the arts. I was a classical musician for a long time before I went to college, as a matter of fact. I didn't finish college till I was about 30, and then went to get my doctorate after that. And so I knew a lot about that, and I wanted to study the behavioral correlates of how people understand beauty in their lives. And then I did a lot of work on philanthropy, how and why people give to charity. And I was serious about that. I grew up in a family where people gave, and it was very important to me to give to the church and to give just charitably as a charitable. I take tithing seriously, but how does that work economically? So I was doing all those behavioral models, and what I found was that behind those things was happiness, was the pursuit of happiness. People are trying to immerse themselves in beauty because they're trying to find the meaning of their life. People give because they're trying to transcend themselves, is what it comes down to. And it comes down to this pursuit of happiness. And so I did that. I wound up studying the science of happiness as a social scientist. And then I went away from academia for a long time. I left for about 11 years to be the president of a think tank in Washington, D.C., but I couldn't get it out of my head. So when I was retiring from that, I wasn't old enough to retire, but when I was leaving that job, I was trying to figure out what to do. And I did what Catholics are supposed to do when you're trying to figure out what to do with the rest of your life. I went and I walked the Camino.
Of course.
This is what Catholics have been doing for more than 1,000 years. If you have a big question, you will be given the information if you walk the Camino. That's what Catholics have believed for, more than a millennium. So as I was walking and I was praying and I was asking the Lord, guide my path. Just guide my path. What do you want me to do? And as I was entering Santiago de Compostela, the medieval city at the cathedral where the Camino ends, I was granted, I believe, the information that I was supposed to spend the rest of my life lifting people up and bringing them together in bonds of happiness and love, using science and ideas, a secular apostolate to help people see that God loves them and God wants them to become happier and to make other people happier as well.
That's amazing. So did you go with the full Camino? Did you go there?
No, I wanted to do the 33 days, but Esther, my wife, said no. Yeah. So she said, you can do the full 33 days, but I'm doing 8. So
nice.
And it was great. We've done it actually one time since then as well. Wow, I strongly recommend to everybody watching us that to do the Camino if you possibly can. It's a deeply, deeply transformative experience. There's something ultra human and yet sublime about ambulation. We're made to walk. We're a walking species.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I guess, especially in I would say kind of an epidemic of unhappiness, we've got a lot of studies out there of people really struggling with mental health issues, with a lot of other things. What are some of the things you're finding really transforming people's lives?
Well, it's true that we're in the middle of a big mental health crisis. It's not new. It's just exploded since about 2008. And what I see in the data is that we have kind of a climate problem for happiness and a weather problem for happiness. I'm speaking metaphorically, obviously. I'm not literally talking about the climate and the weather. The climate for happiness is that, generally speaking, in the United States, people, especially people under 40, have been sort of ticking down in average happiness about 0.5 percentage point per year, the percentage of the population that says, I'm very happy about my life, since about 1990. So it's been going on for a long time. And that climate problem really comes from 4 sources. There's 4 practices that the happiest people engage in every day. They're serious about their family life. They take their friendships very seriously. They see their work as a calling, and they practice their faith. Those are the big 4. I mean, we can go into every kind of detail about it, but it's not that complicated. And all 4 of those things have been in decline. All 4 of those things have been in decline. And that's what's actually been creating the climate of declining happiness. Now, there's some weather, sort of hurricanes that have gone through at the same time. So in 2008, 2009, this is when everybody got a smartphone and got social media on their smartphone, which is one of the most deleterious events, as far as I'm concerned, in the recent history of happiness.
Wow.
And there's a lot going on there. As a matter of fact, I've just finished a book called The Meaning of Your Life, Finding Purpose in an Age of Emptiness, that talks an awful lot about how we changed our brains, largely through technology. The second of these hurricanes was this political polarization problem. And what it really is a culture war in the United States, where baby boomers, people my age, have been sort of conscripting young people as child soldiers into the culture war. And, this is what's created activism problems on campuses and just the hatred and polarization in American politics. And last but not least, of course, with the coronavirus epidemic. The epidemic per se didn't create unhappiness, but our reaction to it with the lockdowns, and which was... It's almost as if the dark one had decided that I've got a perfect way to split people up and make sure they don't look at each other in the eye and we don't have any human contact. We're made to love. God made us to love. And keeping us isolated is the perfect way to create misery. And it did. So clinical depression for people under 30 quadrupled during that period. It really hasn't come back. Generalized anxiety increased by about a factor of 3. It's declined a little bit, but not very much. And so the result is we still just haven't gotten over COVID and our reaction. I shouldn't say we haven't gotten over our reaction to COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are the big things that are actually going on. And so these are the things you want to take on. What do you do to solve the problem? Well, you deal with the climate of happiness. You deal by looking at the things that are pushing us in the wrong direction. Faith, family, friends, and work. Those are the things to work on. And if you really want to solve the weather problems, you need to deal with proactively with technology. You need to solve the polarization, hatred, and politics problem, and you need to make sure that people all come back together and love each other more. Yeah. Those are the things that I'm working on. I'm spending my life dealing with.
It's really interesting. I think especially the insight into the problem of social media, in particular. And I'd love for you to dive a little bit deeper into that because, it's the Pandora's box is open now. So people have to take really meaningful steps towards either engaging or deciding not to engage in it. But it is where a lot of ideas are shared. It's where a lot of good can happen. People hear great ideas on there and stuff, but and good conversations. But man, you want to experience the polarization of the country, go on Twitter. Yeah, it's just, it doesn't take much to see what's really going on in people's minds.
That's awful. No, it's really awful. So our mutual friend, Bishop Barron, has been transformative in a lot of people's lives using the modern means of social media and digital communication to reach people, especially to reach Catholics, to bring Catholics back. It's been beautiful what he's done. And the truth is that there's all kinds of good that can happen. And by the way, even if we wanted to get rid of technology, we wouldn't. Anybody watching us saying, yeah, I'd like to throw my phone in the ocean. Well, okay, great. If you want to be in a cloistered monastery, there are a few of them, and you can probably do that. But for the rest of us, that's
not a workable option.
It's not a workable option, which means that we need other ways to deal with it and use these new technological forces as a force for good. And the way that you do that, by the way, with young people, it's very clear. There are some guidelines and there are some rules. There's not a school K through 12 or university in America that should allow any devices in the classroom. Or during the school day. It's just insane that we don't have the moral fortitude
it's crazy,
to be able to do. It's just nuts. But of course, now in 27 states, governors have caught up and it's going further. And so we're going to get to that particular point. But fundamentally, you don't just find something bad and create rules against it. The rules-based culture against things you don't like, that's never worked. Prohibitions
just
don't
keep
work
adding
at all.
laws.
What you have to do is crowd out what you don't like with something beautiful and good and true. Which is why if you don't like what's going on with the isolation and fear from devices and social media, you substitute love for it. You substitute faith for it. You offer people more in-person, real-life relationships for it. You create the opportunities for people to get something that's much, much better. And there's a lot of research that shows that when people have an opportunity with real friendship and real love in real life, they'll take it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're embodied creatures, right? And so whenever you disembody yourself into a social media app, it's very difficult to actually experience real affection, real relationship with someone. It's almost impossible.
No, it's a poor simulacrum, and we actually understand the neuroscience, the neurobiology behind it involves the neuropeptide in the brain called oxytocin, which is excreted through direct person-to-person eye contact and touch. You and I could have done this conversation over Zoom, but it would be inadequate. It wouldn't be as good. It wouldn't be as deep as what we're actually doing across the table from one another. When I first saw you today after 3 years, I gave you a hug because that's what friends do, is what it comes down to. And so when you don't have that, it's going to be a really problematic experience. During the coronavirus lockdowns, when people were only communicating over social media and Zoom work and all that, they didn't understand why they felt so crummy, why they had this craving for highly glycemic carbohydrate, why they're having all this insomnia. Their brain was disequilibrated is what it comes down to. I mean, we are, as you said, embodied creatures. God made the neuroscience.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. I thought that, right after the introduction in your book, you go right into the first section and it says that happiness is not the goal. I'd love for you to kind of dive into that. What do you mean by that? Because we're talking about wanting to be happy, but it's not necessarily the goal.
Yeah, and people want to be happier, but what they say is they want to be happy, and that's not the right ambition. I mean, there's a reason that we have negative emotions. Our brains, the limbic system of the human brain, is really the onboard hardware that translates perceptions that we have about the outside world into emotions. And it translates them into positive and negative emotions because we perceive threats and opportunities. Threats are translated into negative emotions, fear, anger, disgust, and sadness, because we have to have a signal telling us loud and clear, an alarm system saying, avoid that thing. So we need negative emotions. Jared, if you didn't have negative emotions, you'd be dead in a week. It would be a really bad situation, and yet they're antagonistic to what we think of as pure, unbridled happiness. We also have negative experiences because we walk across the face of the earth. We want, in finding deep satisfaction, we have to delay our gratifications, which can be tricky. We want to find a sense of meaning in our lives, and meaning requires pain and it requires suffering. And any Catholic who doesn't understand this is not paying attention. We literally worship a guy suffering. That's who we were. The Son of God suffering like one of us is emblematic of the human experience. It's a fully incarnate God. And that's and who am I to say, yeah, man, I want to be completely happy all the time on earth. I mean, what hubris, what nonsense, what impossible nonsense. So the thing that I tell secular and religious people is don't try to be happy. You can't. What you can be is happier. You can get better at happiness. And part of that is understanding and managing and growing through your suffering.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because so much of our culture, it's just so anti-suffering, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and nothing against certain fields, but it's here, take this and fix it, right? Or it's here.
Well, it's eliminationist when it comes to suffering itself, and that's wrong. It's not just morally problematic, it's completely impossible. And there's a lot of research that shows that when you try to eliminate your pain, you'll make your pain worse.
Yeah.
It's a lot of interesting research on, for example, back pain. If your back hurts, which, if it doesn't yet, it will. I know you're actually a lifter, so, sooner or later you're going to suffer from lower back pain.
Sure.
And if you try to eliminate it, you'll baby your back and your back will get weaker and you'll have more pain than you would have otherwise. The whole point is you have to understand it. You have to do more exercise. You have to accept it. You have to focus on the parts of your life that are not wound up in this physical pain. And the same thing is true with your mental pain, with your emotional pain. We're built to have a full range of emotions. And so a deeply Christian thing to do, I mean, you can start with a psalm. This is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. And then add a little twist, which is sort of the New Testament twist. And this is the day that the Lord has made with suffering and trials. And I say, Lord, bring it on.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, you just released a video recently about the problem of using distractions to kind of get away from suffering. Like, we need to be able to be in a room by ourselves without the phone on and be okay with that. Part of our culture is so quick to just entertain, distract, so that you don't have to deal with those thoughts. You don't have to deal with maybe bad memories, bad experiences. What advice do you have to help people kind of move through those things?
Well, we're surrounded by constant distraction. It's true. There's an availability of distracting influences like never before, and this is one of the ways that we try to get some instant relief. And it's more or less the same as it's always been. If you went back 50 years in time and talked about how can you immediately alleviate a little bit of pain, you'd be talking about drugs or alcohol, for example, or I don't know, television or whatever it happens to be. And people knew that was not the right way to get through your life, because you're literally missing part of your life by doing that. And you say, well, yeah, but I'm missing the part that I don't like. Well, yeah, that's not how it works. If you want to have a fully integrated life, and you want to have a full set of experiences, and you want to look back on it and say, yeah, that was my life, you don't want to have missed a bunch of it. Now, I get this. I mean, I'm sympathetic to the fact that some people really, really suffer a lot. And there are times when I want to blunt the pain. I take Advil. My back hurts a lot, and so I take Advil. And I actually understand how the mechanism of action of these analgesics and how they work. But what I don't want is to distract myself or eliminate the pain, because I know that actually is not good for me. It'll actually make things worse.
So another thing I really liked in this book as well is you call it the power of metacognition. Mm. Maybe explain a little bit about what you mean by metacognition and how that's useful in our experiences and how we're trying to be happier.
Yeah, well, I talked about the limbic system a minute ago, which is the console of tissue that produces human emotion. And one of the problems that people have is the way the brain is supposed to work, or at least it was designed, the human brain was designed to work, is that you have perceptions below your level of awareness. These are produced in the brainstem and the spinal column and the cerebellum and this primordial stuff that, blinking and breathing and heartbeat and perception below your level of awareness. That sends signals to your limbic system, which turns it into emotion, and the emotions then are relayed to your prefrontal cortex, the most human part of your brain, 250,000 years old. It's brand spanking new in evolutionary terms. And that's where you make a decision about what my emotions mean and how I'm going to act. And that's supposed to happen all day long. It goes from detection to emotion to decision. And that's a miracle. I mean, I'm just super grateful that God made the brain this way. The problem is that a lot of the time we don't execute the relay properly. I mean, from 1 to 2, yeah, if you didn't, you wouldn't jump out of the way of a car when you see the threat and you get run over, and that would be bad, but that's probably not going to happen. More common is when your limbic system fires with emotion, but your prefrontal cortex doesn't react, and so you're being managed by your emotions. And you don't want that. That's when you have a hair trigger, that's when you yell at your spouse, that's when you say something you wish you hadn't said, and you just blurted it out. Or, when people cry at work or something and they wish they didn't, that's sort of the limbic system at work. And you want to find a way for your prefrontal cortex to say, okay, that's that emotion. What does it mean? Why is it? And how am I going to act? That takes time. The time is part of what we call metacognition, which is awareness and management of your own emotions through your rational brain. And it sounds like I'm being like Spock on Star Trek or something, but I'm not. I'm just talking about how the brain is designed to work so that you can be the person that you want to be, as opposed to what your animal impulses are telling you. Where we are as human beings, this is how one of the many ways that we're different than non-human animals, is that we have animal impulses just like any other animal, but we also have moral aspirations, and we can make decisions to live in the space of our moral aspirations. But it takes the executive function. It takes the prefrontal cortex. Gift from God, totally. The question is, how do you do it? So metacognition is a set of techniques that will move the experience of your emotions from the limbic system into the prefrontal cortex, where you're in charge. And there's a whole bunch of ways to do that. Some are simple, like, when you're angry, count to 10. Right? So Thomas Jefferson said, when you're angry, count to 10. When very angry, count to 100. That's the first record that we actually have documentation of that old chestnut that he probably got it from his grandma. But there's a bunch of other ways to do it. Meditation techniques in the karmic religions are very much about that. So Vipassana meditation in the Theravada Buddhist tradition is where you're observing your own emotions at a certain remove, as if you were a third person. And what you're doing is you're using your prefrontal cortex to examine your limbic system. Other ways to do it, people are supposed to do that in cognitive behavioral therapy. So they go to the therapist, and the therapist said, let's get in touch with what's really going on with your emotions, and let's find a way to manage your emotions. Another way to do that is journaling. You can't write with your limbic system. Once the pencil is in your hand and you're writing down, dear diary, I'm feeling angry at my spouse today, it's in your prefrontal cortex and it's a lot less threatening. And my favorite is prayers of petition. When it's on your lips, Lord, this is what's going on in my life. That's executive function, man. It's totally, and so some people, a lot of our Christian sisters and brothers, they talk about being really spontaneous in prayer. I think God wants all of it. It's my hypothesis that he wants my executive function, and he wants to know not just how I feel blurting it out, but the person that I want to be, not my moral aspiration as a person. And when I'm articulating that, when I'm talking to God about the person that I want to be, in effect, what's happening is that God is talking to me about who I can be. And God is helping me to have the will to be the person that I want by helping me to move my emotional life, the experience of that, to my prefrontal cortex.
Wow. Yeah. I love that. So I'm a huge fan of the Stoics personally.
Yeah, sure.
So when I read that part, it just reminded, it's like applying modern science to some of the wisdom that they did have, that it's not the experience that you have, it's how you react to the experience, right? You have the ability to step back regardless of what's going on in your life.
That's pure metacognition.
Absolutely.
And the early church was so influenced by the Stoic philosophers, to be sure, because we took the best of everything forever. I mean, we're the ultimate, philosophical imperialists, we Catholics, right? Like, is it good? I'll take it. It's mine now.
Yes.
And this is one of the great schools that actually this came from, starting, even the great Stoic ideas of Cicero and Aristotle before him, but to the better well-known ones that are not Christian philosophers, Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, for example. Marcus Aurelius persecuted the Christians, and we stole his best ideas.
Exactly.
Last laugh.
Yes, exactly. Well, that's awesome. The other aspect of it is I would love to talk to you about the aspects of work and faith. Especially in the United States, there's a lot of tying to meaning towards what you do for your work, right? There's a lot of, this is what I am based off of my work. And in a certain sense, I get it, but as you say in the book, and I'd love for you to dive into it, there are other ways in which we need to find meaning and purpose in life.
Yeah, so meaning at work largely comes from seeing work as a calling. And seeing work as a calling is intimately related to what we as Christian people think of as vocation. And vocation has a lot of implications to it, of course, because you say, what's your vocation? It's vocation to the priesthood, religious life, married life, single life, whatever it happens to be. But when we think about it in terms of what God wants us to do with our work, this really gets into, for a lot of us as modern Catholics, to a lot of the thinking, for example, of the Opus Dei movement, which talks about the sanctification of ordinary work, where everything is priestly work, right? And so Saint Josemaria Escrivá, the Spanish saint who founded Opus Dei in the early part of the 20th century, he gave a very, very famous homily at the University of Navarre, where my daughter actually attended. We're Spanish American family, my wife, and is from Spain. And he gave this homily called Passionately Loving the World, which just sounds just not Catholic, but no. God made the world. God loves you. Don't be ungrateful for his creation. It's kind of what it comes down to. And he says, you understand that there's a holiness, a sacredness to the work that you do in the laboratory, in the barracks, in the home. And he just lists all these walks of life. And he says, these are holy vocations is what they come down to. You have to see them as such, to sanctify the work in the same way that you would if you were a priest in the pulpit. That's how incredibly important it is. And that gives us meaning to it. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that your job through your work is to love others, is to dignify others, is to lift other people up in everything that you do. And that's always had a huge impact on me. I mean, I've talked about the fact that I've seen in my research, for example, that joy comes from work under two circumstances that have nothing to do with money and power and position and prestige, nothing. It has to do with earning your success, which means that you're creating value with your life. You believe that you're needed and that you're serving other people. You're doing something that's actually good for other people. And I've got the data. I've seen this for years, that people will love their jobs, whether they're putting roofs on houses or they're college professors like you and me, or whatever they happen to do. They sanctify their work by earning their success, creating value, and doing it in the service of other people, which sounds exactly like how Catholics talk about vocation in ordinary life.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I'd love to hear, one of the questions I had for you was, in all of this research, in your work in regard to happiness, what surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that surprise me, and things continue to surprise me all the time. I have this column in the Atlantic every Thursday morning called "How to Build a Life," and it's 1,300 words on a new area of happiness science every week. And I've been writing it for 5 years, so I've got more than 250 columns in the bank. And I'll start off with a supposition about something. It's like I kind of think how these things work. So I'm always reading the literature, I'm looking at the research, and then I'll get into it and be like, I was wrong. And so I have to actually, and that's interesting. And so I've been corrected a whole lot of times. I think probably what's blown my mind consistently the most is that Mother Nature doesn't care if we're happy at all. I believe God wants us to be happy, but our evolved nature, our animal impulse, doesn't care. On the contrary, if we follow our animal impulses, look, it shouldn't surprise me, Jared, but it does, because everybody thinks that if they do what they want, then they'll be happy. And that's just completely wrong. The day that you stop being at war with yourself is the day that you give up and become unhappier, is what it comes down to. And it's so abundantly clear in the empirical. I could come at this from a theological point. My wife is a graduate student and Catholic educator in theology. That's her bailiwick. I come at it as a scientist, and it's just abundantly clear that Mother Nature has only two goals for Jared and Arthur and everybody else, which is survive and pass on your genes, which are not highly dignified goals.
Right.
And so that space, that's the animal impulse space. And on top of that is the moral aspiration space. And so to the extent that you acknowledge, you respect your animal impulses, and then you aspire to something that's much greater than that's the secret to actually getting happier. And it took a whole lot of research for me to come to terms with the fact that the things that I want are not the things that I need. They just aren't.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I want to switch just a little bit. I'd love to hear more about your faith journey. I know you converted to Catholicism at one point in your life, and I'd love to just kind of hear, how did that process work, and how's it been?
Yeah, I didn't have a dramatic conversion like a lot of Catholics do, where they're like ardent atheists. And there's a C.S. Lewis. He wasn't Catholic, but we'd take him anyway. But these super atheists and evangelical atheists at that, and the whole thing. No, I grew up in a Christian family. My both families on both sides, my mother's family, my father's family, they were missionaries. They were evangelical missionaries. My father's family, my father was born in the Navajo Nation, or his father was the head of the mission school. My mother's family, my grandparents, my mother's father was actually born on the boat coming to the United States from South Africa. They were Danish immigrants that had been missionaries to the Zulus in South Africa. So I come from this super evangelical stock, and there were no Catholics on either side of the family going back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, none. And it never occurred to me, I didn't even know any Catholics growing up, but I was a Christian kid, and we didn't miss church. There's no daily mass when you're Presbyterian. But what happened, it's a weird thing that happened. I was a super serious musician from the time I was young, and I was on a music trip to Mexico when I was 15, and they're just marching us through these boring, pyramids and churches and all that. All I wanted to do was talk to girls, but they were just distracting me from that. And they took us into the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico City. And I thought, all right. And it was the old basilica. It was the tilma of Juan Diego was displayed on the left side of the altar at that point permanently. It's in the new basilica. It's a different setup. And I remember it was like a Wednesday afternoon. We were sitting there, and I was looking at it, and there's something going on, and I couldn't get it out of my head. And it's weird because the gaze is not exactly at you, but it's something beyond you. And I'm 15, so it's not like I'm having this deep intellectual experience, right? But I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I went home to my home, and I said to my parents, I want to visit the local Catholic church because I couldn't get it out of my head. And they're like, oh, well, here we go, some weird new thing. I guess it's better than drugs. So, and so I started actually going to the local Catholic church, and I met a priest, the guy British guy, actually a Northern Irish guy, but Catholic, played the guitar. He's a good guy. And right after my 16th birthday, I came into the church, and I've been Catholic ever since. Then I married a Catholic girl, a non-practicing Catholic girl from Barcelona, and then I brought her into the church. I prayed her in. I didn't do anything. There was no act of will. I just prayed every time, when the priest says, and now we take a few moments to offer up what we have in the silence of our hearts, and they give you 1 second. I'm like, hold up, Father. Hold up, Father. I got some prayers here, but it was always bring my wife into church, bring my wife into the church. Even after we had our kids and we had immigrated to the United States, we got married in Spain. I lived in Spain when we got married, and we moved to the States, and I was going alone, and I was taking the kids alone, and that poor widower with his children, But then when we moved to Washington, D.C., we enrolled our kids in an Opus Dei school called The Heights, very famous place. And that's what did it. They got her. The prayers got her, and they got her too. And now she leads me. Now she leads me on paths of righteousness. My wife.
That's awesome.
She actually has a show on Radio Guadalupe.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she does every Tuesday at noon. Everybody's got to go listen to Mujer y Palabra.
Awesome.
And my wife's name is Esther Moon Brooks.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, one of the things that I really appreciate about your work is that as a devout Catholic, you go into some of the more secular circles and are able to thrive within it, right? You're writing a book with Oprah Winfrey, you're writing, you're working with the Dalai Lama, you're in all of these different arenas. And I really see you as an example of Catholics not being afraid to go out into the world and bring what is best about our religion and about who we are out into the world and share it in good faith. And, you mentioned culture wars, to not participate in those, rather to go into it with love, and regardless of what the other person might think, what their politics might be, what their religion might be. So I'd love to hear your advice to Catholics on how we can do that well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that an awful lot, and I've given that a great deal of thought. We're all missionaries. We're in the mission field. You and I are. You're at Benedictine College, which is the epicenter of so many good things in the Catholic Church. But I'm at Harvard University, so in a way, I don't feel under siege at all. But I'm not uniform military at all. I'm trying to win people over, and you don't do that by being militant and pugilistic and hostile. You just don't do it. You have to have love in your heart for people who are not where you are yet. You have to help people understand that they have a path and know what yours is. And it's funny because I've taken a lot of advice from people of different religions and faiths. So you mentioned His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who told me, "I want you to be a better Catholic." He told me. It's a beautiful thing. But also, I've had a lot of friends in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, our Mormon sisters and brothers. And I had one I worked for when I was at the Rand Corporation way back. I was working on my PhD. He was my boss. And he had done his mission in France, a Mormon missionary in France. Can you imagine? Even in America, the words never uttered by anyone is good news. There's missionaries on the porch. It's like, no. So, but in France, slam, slam. And he used to pray. He told me he had this prayer: Lord, let the door stay open 1 inch. Why? Because that's the right kind of ambition. If you really believe what we say we believe, then your job is to crack the door. And if the door is going to get kicked in, that's going to be the Holy Spirit. And you don't know when. What you need to do is just plant seeds. Crack the door. And that's how I actually see it. Now, there's two ways to do it in a secular profession like I have. There's really two kinds of apostolate. That kicking down the door and shoving a crucifix in somebody's face and saying, repent or burn is a pretty counterproductive. That's not what Catholics do anyway, because we're service missionaries, right? It's like medical care or education or something. But I've found in my work and in my research and in my experience that the two best tools of secular apostolate are admiration and friendship. So friendship is what everybody has available to them, is being a good friend, being an authentically good friend. And that means being morally impeccable and serving other people in a spirit of love. And admiration means being completely impeccable in your professional standards. So that people want to be like you is what it comes down to. And then they will discover that you're Catholic if you're natural and public about it. Just be natural and public about it. You don't have to, carrying a sign, but everybody knows how the Google box works. My students know on the first day of class that I'm a Catholic freak. They know that it's what I do, because there's 100 talks of me in Catholic in Catholic venues talking about my faith. And when I go into the classroom, I say on the first day of class, full disclosure, my Catholic faith is the most important thing in my life. And so you have to understand that the things that I tell you are from that perspective. And then I'm not bugging them and I'm not haranguing them, but a lot of them ask me about it in office hours, a lot. The two biggest questions I get in office hours, by the way, are number one, how do I fall in love and stay in love? Form a family. And number two, how do I find my faith? And it's funny because last semester, I was finishing my class at the Harvard Business School. They're all MBAs. They're just whip smart. They're great. And one of them, the last day of class, at the beginning of the class and the last day of class, you do the class evaluations. You have to leave, of course. And you come back in and the rest of the class, the evaluations are done. I do an AMA, right? Ask me anything, right? And if this kid, super smart guy, puts up his hand. He's funny too. He says, well, Professor, we all know you're a big Catholic. And I'm like, yeah, fair. And he says, but if you're such a big Catholic, how come you never try to convince us? Right? And I said, well, now that you mention it, there's a brochure under all your seats. I said, look, my job is to show you that you have a transcendental path. You do. I have a way of interpreting that in my life. I like it a lot. Happy to talk about it with you. But my job in this class is to start you on your transcendental path. And I have the faith that it's going to be the right one. I have the faith that it's actually going to be the right one. I think that's the right approach. I think it's the light touch, completely open, totally natural. A lot of Catholics make it weird. It's like, don't make it weird. It should be about as weird as wearing a shirt to class, which would be weird if you didn't do that, right? Is what it comes down to. And I have certain protocols that I actually have talked about at the Seek conference for the Focus Missionaries. I've actually walked through the protocols of how to, in the secular world, how to do friendship and admiration and share the faith in that way. As a gift, never as a weapon, always as a gift.
That's awesome. So the last question that we love to ask our guests, the mission here at Benedictine College is that we really want to transform culture in America.
Yeah.
And so if you were to answer the question, how can our students, how can Benedictine people, how can people out in the world that maybe have been influenced by this college transform culture in America?
Yeah. And it's a big question, of course. And there's a lot of nuance that can go into it. And there's books and books and books and books and books that I'm writing those books, right? But as a fundamental matter, to kind of boil it under first principles, as a behavioral scientist, I can say that there's two polarities of cultures that you find. And that doesn't mean that they're unadulterated by all of the forces. But the two polarities are the opposites that we find in both all major philosophies and religions, which are the opposites of fear and love. Love and hate are not opposites. Hate is downstream from fear. And how do we know that? Well, Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching talked about the fact that when there is love, fear is not present. And St. John the Apostle says that perfect love drives out fear. And so this is ever present is the whole idea. And in point of fact, you find that cultures are fundamentally fear or love polarized. That doesn't mean that a love-based culture doesn't have fear or a fear-based culture doesn't have love. But fundamentally, this is the vehicular language. You find it in families, you find it in companies, you find it at colleges, and most of academia in America today is fear-based. A lot of families are, a lot of the economy is, a lot of countries are. And when you have a polarized, highly polarized, hate-based politics, that's a very fear-based politics. That's the opportunity for Catholic people. Why? Because the goal is to change the polarity, is to flip the polarity. And how do you do it? By bringing love where there's fear. You go where there's fear. You say, aha, opportunity, and go running toward the contempt and fear that you actually see. And just with no exceptions, bring in love. That's what you do. And that's the gospel of Jesus Christ, as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't mean that you give into anything. It doesn't mean that you acquiesce to all different things. It means that you speak the truth always in love, is what it comes down to. And when you don't know what to do, as St. Thomas Aquinas said, will the good of the other as other, which of course is the Thomistic definition of love itself.
Awesome. Well, Arthur, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Jared.
Thank you for all of your work. Highly, highly recommend all of our viewers and listeners pick up your books, learn more ways of being more happy.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks you so much. Thanks for your work. I appreciate it. Thanks to everybody at Benedictine College and people watching us who haven't been here. You got to come.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed the Benedictine Dialogues, a production of Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas. To catch all the latest and support our growing platform, visit media.benedictine.edu. And be sure to recommend this show to your friends and family. Help us to transform culture in America one conversation at a time.